welcome to Braveheart Conversations, where we learn the art of love through brave and compassionate conversations. I'm Jillian Aurora.
And I'm Marie Wallace.
And we are your hosts today.
Okay, so this morning we are going to be talking about standards versus requests. And what we mean by that is a lot of times we hear, I set boundaries, but my husband won't respect them, right? Or, so-and-so won't respect them. Boundaries don't work. And I hear this pretty frequently for those that are newbies to boundary setting, right? This is part of the process of learning.
Or too many exceptions.
Right. Yeah, I can't set a boundary with my mom or my children, or we've talked about these exceptions before, that we're actually living at their mercy if we allow an exception to our values. So there's two very distinct things that are important in relationships. One is your standards or boundaries. I think that there's some small differences there. But standards and boundaries are both really important. But the thing about standards and boundaries is that they're requirements. They aren't negotiable. They are, this is what's required to access my space. Or a standard, for example, might be a standard for being in a close relationship with me is no substance addictions. That's a biggie for me. Or no lying. Like, those would be standards that if you show me that your true colors are different than that, it's not that I have judgment towards you, it's that you're just not a good fit for a relationship with me. So those standards, we have a lot of programming to overcome because we often feel guilty for having those standards. In fact, I still deal with those feelings when I say, I'm not willing to be in a close relationship with someone who is currently using substances. That can still feel like, oh, I'm such a snob for saying that. But after many years of blowing past my values and my desires about being in a healthy relationship, I've learned that is a standard that I have to honor me. So boundaries and standards are requirements, right? And so when I see something that's out of alignment with that, it's my job to walk away. But then the other side of that, requests, and this is where we get hung up because we're often treating standards and boundaries as if they are requests. We're treating them as if we're saying, will you please do blah, 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 instead of this is a requirement to be in relationship with me. Requests, however, they're still a really important function in relationships. Requests are important because we may have times when we say, it would be really meaningful to me if you got me some flowers, or I'm really in need of an outing. This is not a boundary, right? This isn't a requirement. This is simply communicating with
what your needs are,
exactly.
or your desires might be.
Right, but it's not I'm going to leave the relationship if this doesn't happen.
If you don't bring me flowers.
Right, and so, Marie, I think you've been really great at sharing this information, with you and Joe. You're really able to share your requests, and these aren't hardline standards. These are, just communicating, this is what I'm feeling, this is what I'm needing right now. So, Marie, do you want to share a little bit of insight about requests and how in your relationship with Joe, or you can share outside of romantic relationships too, but like being able to express what you're wanting?
Yeah, I like that. I think in order for people to feel success in their relationship, it's nice to know things that would enhance your relationship or make me happy is a little weird to say, but things that just create joy for me. And so in our relationship, Joe feels successful in the relationship if I explain to him what things matter to me, what things are important to me, and it's outside of the boundaries. But yes, it would be nice to have flowers right now. He actually became super husband because he would show up at school with flowers for me, and it would be the beginning of the school year. But what people didn't know on the backside was that I was requesting him to get me flowers so that I could start my school year off in this really fun manner and be able to, I don't know, it was just something that I loved and something that I thought was cool. Or, asking for little things that bring, maybe it's a massage, maybe it's whisper sweet nothings. I'm not sure, what the requests are, but it's way different. It's not something that I'm saying, if you don't do this, then I'm going to bail, right? It's just those really, it would be nice if kind of requests.
It's not a non-negotiable.
It's not a non-negotiable.
Marie, can you share a difference between like something that would be a non-negotiable, that would be a standard for you versus a request?
Well, one of the things in our relationship, and we both agreed to this, is absolutely no cheating. It ruins the integrity of the relationship, and it's dishonest in so many ways. So one of the things he said in one of our conferences is like, someone goes, well, what is, a boundary? He goes, well, if she cheats on me, her shit's out on the lawn. It's pretty clear. Maybe there's some negotiable things in there. I would highly doubt it, but that's one of the ones. And absolutely, when we're talking, there's no yelling, no screaming, no name calling. We have some pretty strong boundaries around communication and conflict. So how to handle conflict. If you need time out, then go take some cave. We call it cave time. Go take cave time. It is time that is honoring. When you removing yourself from the relationship is very honoring to both of us, because you might say something or do something that isn't helpful to the relationship. So those are a few of our kinds of standards as far as how to handle conflict.
Yeah.
It's super huge.
I know a lot of women get hung up on the idea of setting non-negotiables because it feels unloving, right? It feels unloving to be in a marriage and to say, no, I still believe that if these things were to happen, I would leave. Has that ever felt hard for you, or is that difficult to say, like, I would walk away from my relationship with Joe as much as I love him?
Yeah.
I still would if these things happened. Is that hard?
Well, I think it used to be hard. And I think when you realize the importance of what you value most, and honoring myself and how I feel in the relationship is a stronger value than holding on to someone, Joe or anyone, at the cost of giving up what I truly believe in. So is it hard? Would I miss Joe if these? Sure, I would totally miss him, but he knows that I don't need him or require him to have a healthy, successful life. I just want him in my space because he's a pretty awesome dude. But it doesn't mean that there's not a standard or a requirement for us to stay together. As terrible as that sounds, and as much as I love him, it would be a honoring, loving thing to let him go if those boundaries were broken.
Right. And, something that has been really key for me over the last year is really an acute awareness of my standards being a direct reflection of my self-worth. The higher, the deeper level I have of self-worth, the higher my standards are. So what often happens for me is I know I'm really hitting my growth edge if my standards feel outrageous.
I like it.
So, for example, this last week, I deeply, deeply appreciate my relationship with my boyfriend Carter, and one of our values really is we have both mutually agreed that we have a very clear idea of what a relationship means, and a relationship is there to empower both of us. And if our relationship at any point is not making us better versions of ourselves, nourishing us and empowering us to, better live in our purpose, then the most loving thing that either of us could do is to walk away from the relationship. And we mutually believe that. And so that's a transparent thing for us, and something that we're always aware of. And I think that gives us a level of accountability with each other as well.
And like you said, empowering. How empowering is it to know where those edges are, or to have an idea? It would be just like if we decided to play Monopoly and everybody had a different set of rules, and it was just this crazy free-for-all. No one knows how to play the game or win the game, if that's your goal. But
well, yeah. And so clarity is a really big piece too. So we're constantly learning what our standards are. So I know that I'm still far away from understanding all of my standards that I will ever know. I know a certain level, and sometimes something that is really unpleasant to me will happen, and then I'll go, oh, there's a new standard. I just identified a new standard, and that is the beauty of resentment or frustration or any of these negative feelings. It is guidance for me to go, oh, there's that value that's really important to me, and I get to shore up this new standard. And so this last week I identified a new standard, which to me was I really don't enjoy romantic partnerships where one of us is socializing in the middle of the night. Does that make sense? But when I was discovering this new standard for me, I felt so much come up that was, you're being outrageous, you're being unrealistic, that's too much to ask, that's controlling, like all of this resistance came up. And so it's been a practice to learn how to shut down the chatter and to say, I'm allowed to have this desire. And it doesn't mean I'm saying that the other person is bad and wrong for if they don't line up. But it's my obligation to myself to communicate that and to say, this is really important to me. And this is a standard. This is not a request. This is a standard. And if that's not okay with you, that's all right. It's just not a fit. And so having the courage to have those decisions, because this goes back to the idea that we were talking about. In my relationship today, we want each other to share our standards, and we believe wholeheartedly that by both of us honoring each other's standards, that's how we have the most empowering relationship. Is if I am somehow out of alignment with his standards, then I don't want him to stay caged in a relationship with me.
We'll both be miserable.
And vice versa.
Resentment,
Right. So, and very often it's interesting because if either of us share a standard, then it's just the communication of that where we're like, yeah, of course, that makes sense. I don't mind that.
Cause ourselves this grief and worry. Well, I don't know if I can bring that up, and then they're like, sure, like, oh. And
it's such a testament to the relationship too, because every time that there has been either of us that have said, this hurts or this doesn't feel good, there is. Because the relationship is important and it's not a hierarchy, it's a partnership, and we're not okay with win-lose situations. That is a partnership. There's no win-lose situations in a partnership. There's only
win-wins. Only.
And so because of that, the response is always very telling. There's always, oh, of course I don't mind making, that's not a small that's not a big ask. That's something that I'm glad to do. And if that's ever not the answer, then we'll cross that bridge too.
Sure.
And that's why I think partnerships are truly a very courageous thing to do, because it requires honesty full honesty to be able to say, I don't line up with that. Or to say,
encouraged to bring it up and they have those conversations.
Yep. And to say, this is a value for me. And in order to honor myself, I'm going to express this value and this standard, even if it means discovering that we're not a match anymore. That's tough. But that's so much more courageous than the alternative, which is saying, like, I'm afraid of losing the relationship, so I won't speak.
Or hanging on for dear life, even if it's not a good fit, right? Hanging on for dear life because you want that companionship and you're afraid that you'll never ever find another one.
Yep.
Yeah, we've had those conversations too, but usually it's fear of losing the relationship that makes us compromise what we value or what we are asking for our requirements. And holding on. And it's so dishonoring to both of us.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I think that's a whole new paradigm to believe, like, I want to hear your standards, and if I'm not a match for your standards, I'll gladly release you so that you can honor these standards. Like, that's a whole different way of having loving relationships.
And being willing to listen, because sometimes in relationships, those are one way, one partner versus another. Well, so creating that space that both of you are mutually giving and receiving those standards as well as values, because that's what increases that happiness as well. And also knowing my person's in any relationships, standards and values, it allows me to make decisions better. It's not as excruciating because I know where I stand and I know where my relationship stands. It just makes things a lot easier to.
Yep.
It's not as torturous.
Yeah, because I think there's a lot of guesswork, and not just guesswork, but in the old way of doing relationships, it's not only guessing, but it's a continual process of self-betrayal. Because if my guess is that you're not going to be okay with my standard, I just don't speak it. I just accommodate myself to whatever I think your decision's going to be, which
causes more resentment.
And it's not loving to either person. It's not what actually is going to serve that person or the world, because the world deserves to have you in your most thriving, tapped in, turned on, vibrant
things to do.
person. Yeah. And when we are sacrificing our standards and really just accommodating and molding ourselves around what we think other people are going to want from us, that's fake, that's inauthentic, and it's just not honoring to anyone. So I think we all deserve to level up in this area. And
when you reach that bridge of the resistance, like you were talking about, it's time to level up. It's like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, and that mental chatter is hard, when you're thinking. I totally understand when you're like, this really bothers me, and I really want to say this, but then, like, there's all of this stuff, I don't want to be demanding, I'm going to be, perceived as selfish. The selfish, buzzword is so huge. So, I think that's all the resistance for setting boundaries and standards. I want to go back to requests, because this is something that we often miss, that requests are a really important part of relationships. And these aren't, like we said before, these are not the non-negotiables. These aren't things that you're like, if you don't do this, I'm not able to be in relationship with you. We're not a match. It's not saying that. It's just communicating what your desires are. And I love, Marie, you're such a light in this, because so many women struggle with saying, man, it would be really meaningful if I received flowers at school on the first day of the year. Most women aren't willing to say that unapologetically.
And they get shocked. They get shocked that I ask, because they think that's like too much to ask.
So tell me the resistance that comes up.
From them?
From the words that they said, or even in your own brain, why you shouldn't say that.
Some of the resistance that comes up that I hear is it's selfish. You can't do that. Like, but why? I think I've gone beyond that, so I'm not sure if I do know why. I think it's a conditioned way of being, conditioned that women aren't supposed to ask.
But they're just supposed to
women
know.
in general, yeah, and the guy's supposed to just know. Like he cannot read your mind. I'm just saying. Nor can anyone in the relationship if we're not putting out our requests or even saying and expressing how we feel. Then they're just guessing, and then they can never be successful. I think that's one thing that we miss when we aren't saying what we're expressing, is we're not allowing the people in our lives to be successful in the relationship, and it becomes controlling and manipulating. They don't get hints. Our daughters, we raised 3 daughters, and all 3 of them said the number one advice we gave them was to ask for what you want. Just can't pull it out of your head. Hints don't work. And hints are just
passive.
Yeah, it's passive aggressive. It's like, just come right out and say. All they can say is no, right? The worst thing, and most likely they'll say yes. Wow, I hadn't even thought of that.
Well, and
it's our anniversary. Yeah, I would really like to go to dinner.
I think it's a relief when I know what my partner wants, right? When that communication is open, then it's a relief. I don't want to do the guesswork. Yeah, there's some surprises.
It's exhausting.
I mean, I think that there's a balance where, yeah, it's fun when I can, create some sort of surprise that hasn't been asked for, but it is also really nice to know what my partner really loves. And when there's no shame around saying, this is what I love and I'd really like to have more of it. I really like these particular outings, or I'd really like to do this more often.
Which makes the surprise even more fun because they'll like it.
Right. So I think that it's relief on both sides. And I do think that we have some old programming as women specifically. There's a bit of a gender divide there where women over the last few centuries haven't really, it hasn't been their role to ask for what they need. It wasn't allowed. They were there to cater to men. And so I think that there's some hangover from that old thinking. And we get to heal that, right? As partners, if you truly have a partnership, then that means both people care equally to not accommodate, but to support and to encourage the other person. And it's not a one-way thing. It's not one person's role to support. It's both people's role to support.
I'm glad you brought that up because I have heard the other way too, where the woman was exactly able to ask but didn't allow the space. And here's what I would suggest. Let it be a conversation that's open, like once a month, a couple of times a year, where you say, hey, what are some things, just opening a conversation, saying, are you happy with things? Is there something I could do more? And be open and willing to, as a matter of fact, I haven't asked this. Just leaving room and space to have those conversations, because sometimes some of us might need an invitation. Like, I didn't know that, I don't know. You see what I'm saying? Is sometimes just having that room and that space to have the conversation is enough to say, we haven't looked at this in a little while. Especially when you've been married a long time or with your partner for a long time, you sort of forget, like, oh, wait, I haven't asked that in a really long time, and I would really like to know.
Yeah, and I think, what comes up for me listening to this piece of the conversation is we often think that we can be healthy enough to make a relationship healthy, which I think is such a huge myth.
That's a great.
And this is the point where I became so aware that I was not able to make up for my partner's lack of self-worth. So I would ask this question, which I think is a really powerful question. To my partner, I would say, how do you feel most loved? Right? because it's really that same.
Yeah, it's a great question.
That's what we're talking about here is how do you feel most loved? And almost always the response I would get is I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where it is our own work and our own self-awareness that's so key in our relationships. If you can't love yourself and you can't honor yourself and you don't have clarity about your own needs and your own desires, you really can't be healthy in a relationship. And that same principle applies to your partner. And so it's really important to have a partner that is tapped in to wanting to understand themselves, so that they can participate in the relationship. So if I ask the question, how do you feel most loved? And I just get like, gee, I don't know. I haven't thought about it. That's really frustrating. That kind of goes back
You're throwing a dart in the dark and hoping that it lands somewhere.
Yeah. And there's that quote I'm probably going to butcher, but if you don't have clarity about what you want, then you're going to kind of sort of get what you want, because you haven't defined what you want. And so you're kind of always going to have this sense of, I haven't gotten what I want because you haven't defined what you want. So how can you ever express to your partner and ever know if your partner's getting anywhere close to the mark if you haven't defined what it is that you want? So I find, this is such an important principle that if your partner can't define what they want, that's a red flag, or at least it is for me.
Well, it's a piggyback because it shows that you're not growing together. And what the problem can be is that you grow past that relationship and they stay stifled and stuck. And one person I was dating, their best days had already happened. And they weren't looking for, and that's okay. It just wasn't a good fit because I wanted to grow and learn and be the best version of myself. And it was very clear and very obvious that wasn't important to them. And it's, for me, for a relationship to grow, we both have to be growing, and then our relationship grows on the outside. But we both have to be growing for that to really expand. In my opinion, I suppose that's my opinion, but.
Yeah.
And what I've witnessed is that if we're both not looking to be the best versions of ourselves, it's usually...
And just awareness of ourselves.
Awareness.
This goes back to, you being able to say, I really love flowers on the first day of school to celebrate the beginning, right? You had to have awareness that was a desire for you.
Yes.
And then it therefore made it easier for your partner to meet that need and gladly step up to that, right? But you had to be able to define it yourself first. Just like when we ask our partner, how do you feel most loved? They have to be able to define that. And then when we're able to both be aware of our own needs and desires as a partner, it makes it just that much more fun, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I know they love this, and I'm just going to gladly step up to that, and it just makes the relationship so much more fulfilling on both sides. But that awareness is key, and it takes work. It takes work to define that, and it takes courage to ask for it. Hi, where are we at on time? Hi, Abby. Good morning. We are right at time.
Okay. It felt
that
like
was
it.
Perfect.
It felt like it.
All right. Well, as usual, we love your questions and comments. So if you feel the need to reach out and tell us how we could improve, how we could add something, or if you have a follow-up question, please reach out. Please let us know. You can directly reach me at defytheaverage@gmail.com, or you can reach Marie.
Marie@mariesgold.com. We love to hear from you. It gives us food for thought, and always helps us level up too.
Absolutely. You can also join our Facebook group, Braveheart Conversations, and you can join discussions there. You'll see announcements for our next topics, which reminds me, I should pull up our next topic for the week. Bear with me for just a moment here. Braveheart Conversations. We are on episode 75, which is amazing to me. All right, here we go. 75. Celebrating differences in relationships. This is going to be a really juicy one. So, yeah, that's going to be exciting. Differences. Instead of finding people who are only exactly the same as you, but really loving partnerships or friendships, but really seeing the value in having different elements, different, what's the word I'm looking for?
Capacities.
Yeah, skills, or just
that's your growing edge. That's why we're in relationship with them, to grow some more.
Exactly, but really being able to honor differences in people. So really excited to talk to you guys about that next week. So if you have questions or comments, please send them, and we'll be back with you next Thursday morning as usual, live in our Facebook group. So I hope you all have a very blessed, wonderful week. Enjoy the sunshine out there while it lasts. Okay, bye guys.
Bye, guys.
We love you.